Good morning. We'll call our meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody, and unbelievably, at the speed time flies, we're already at our last meeting of the first part of the session before turnaround. So we've got one bill that is up for final action today, and we'll work on that. Then we'll come back. Ours will be the first Wednesday after we come back from turnaround, and we have a kind of not a hearing, but an information session that was proposed on, since we're rural development, on broadband activities in Kansas. So we'll do that and see where that's going. I know there's been some progress made, and all of that plays into rural development pretty well as far as what can happen and what can't happen if there's not good broadband. So on our final action today, we have House Bill 2623 enacting the rural remote worker incentive. And David, would you like to give us a refresher on this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2623 would enact the Rural Remote Worker Incentive Act. The act would be under the administration of the Secretary of Commerce. Section 1 would be the name and citation of the act. Section 2 is the definition section. A remote job is defined as a full-time, permanent, remote, or mobile employee who works from such employee's residence or other space in a rural area for more than 30 hours per week. And a rural area is defined in the act as a city with a population of 60,000 or less in a county with a population of 80,000 or less, or any county with a population of 40,000 or less. Section 3 is where the incentives and the requirements for the incentives are located. If a business creates a minimum of 5 net new rural remote jobs in rural areas, they may apply to the Secretary for incentives. All remote jobs would have to be at least 30 miles from the business location. The minimum wage for the remote job would be equal to or greater than the county median wage where the remote job would be located. And in making the application, the business would have to include a copy of their quarterly wage and employment tax return form that they submit to the Department of Labor, or other evidence that the Secretary might require through rules and regulations. Subject to appropriations and upon approval of the Secretary, the business would receive a cash incentive payment of $4,000 per net rural remote job created. The total amount of incentives under the Act is capped at $600,000. And it does give the Secretary the ability to adopt rules and regulations to implement and administer the provisions of the Act. Section 4 creates the Rural Remote Worker Incentive Fund in the State Treasury. The fund would be administered by the Secretary of Commerce or the Secretary's designee. And expenditures from the fund would be for the purpose of paying the incentives that are described in Section 3. Section 5 provides that incentives under the Act may be in addition to any other program that would be administered by the Secretary of Commerce. And I can take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for David? No? Representative Kessler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I was reading this, why would it, refresh my memory here, why would we put with population of a county of 80,000 or population of 40,000? Why were both of those in there?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Kessler, it's kind of an either or. It could either be a city with a population of 60,000 or less that's in a county of 80,000 or less, or it could just be any city within a county of less than 40,000. So it's one or the other. But
any other questions? If not, thank you, David. Well, we're at a point we'll now take up House Bill 2623. And is there a motion concerning 2623? Have a motion by Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we pass out HB 2623 favorably.
Second. Representative Baker, a second. And now, are there any proposed amendments for House Bill 2623? And I'll start out. I do have one, and David, if you can pass it out, there may be others, but this may try to clarify things like Representative Kessler noted, and a couple other things to make sure the intent of what we want it to do is clearer. As soon as you have them, I'll go through and explain this amendment, and if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them, or David can try to answer them for us. Okay, well, the rural remote worker is really something that has come out of the kind of what we've been seeing during the pandemic, when a lot of rural towns in Kansas have been seeing people move in that can work from home, and it appears that there, could continue to be a trend where businesses locating in Kansas may still look for, with the workforce issues that we have, still look for workers in rural counties to fill jobs for them. So I'll go through on this some of the changes, like on page 1, line 9, just raises the number of from 5 to 7 because of an increase of sections in the new bill. On line 17, there is a change here where it says the medium wage paid to employees located in the county where the business intends to establish the remote jobs. When we had the hearing on the bill, Representative Poskin raised a question on the wage. Should it be where the company is located? And with some questions that were asked by her, the normal thing with a company locating in Kansas that when they apply for benefits through the incentives through the Department of Commerce, it's the wage in the county where they're locating. And since this would be remote jobs coming out of that county where the company located, this would change the wording that it would, the medium wage payment would be based on the county where the business is, the new or expanding or new business is or will be located in Kansas. So if the business is in Johnson County and they're putting a rural remote worker out in Seward County, the wage would be based on the Johnson County, the headquarters of it, because they're not establishing a branch or a satellite office in Seward, just remote workers. So that would kind of clear that up, and appreciate her, Representative Poskin's question on that, and this would make it clear. On lines 35 and 36, this is eliminating lines 35 and 36 and having this bill would apply to counties going to page 2 with a population of 40,000 or less, which corresponds with the Ross counties and makes it more rural than it does when you get into a city of 60,000 and counties of 80. That sounds less rural to me. So this would take care and put it back in the Ross counties. In section 3, on line 4, wanted to make sure that it was clear that this is a one-time payment. We talked about that in the hearing, but wanted to make sure that the intent was shown that it was a one-time payment, and also wanted to make sure that it was clearer when a company could apply for this incentive, that it's not as soon as they do the job, but that after the employee has been on the job for a 12-month period and the company is able to provide the proof through their wage reports that they've had this employee on board for the 12-month period, consecutive period, and that it is a position that is at least 30 hours or more. So that what the bill calls a full-time position in mobile work. So they could apply for it in the tax year where they have completed 12 consecutive months of employment for that company. And so again, on line 8, it talks about the median wage, and it just makes that correspond to what we talked about before, about having it be in that county. When we get down to line 22 on page 2, there was, we talked about, but it wasn't clear in the bill on where who would be responsible for implementing the program. And so it'd be the Department of Commerce. Shall implement and administer the provisions of this act, utilizing their existing staff and resources of the department. So it doesn't add any increased expense for provisions of that, and that, and we go down to line 32, and this puts in a sunset on the bill, so it can be evaluated a 3-year sunset, and it indicates what will happen to the money if the sunset is not extended, that the money will transfer from the Rural Worker Incentive Fund back to the State General Fund, as will the liabilities that are left to pay out for the $4,000 incentives for the Rural Worker Fund. And so there will be basically at the end of the 3 years, there'd be an evaluation of the program, and the legislature would look, and if it's been successful, it can be extended. If it's been something that hasn't worked out like anticipated, we would have a time that it could end, but felt 3 years would give it a period to ramp up and then see whether we can take advantage of the situation that we have appearing. So, and then down on line 41, again, it says that who would report, who would promote this and get it out to the businesses that this is available, not only the businesses that are receiving Department of Commerce incentives, but to expanding or relocating businesses coming into Kansas that don't ask for any incentives, but still could hire remote workers. So this wording indicates that utilizing existing staff and resources, Department of Commerce will promote the program to expanding or new businesses coming into Kansas, including businesses that have not applied for any economic development incentive programs that are administered by the Secretary. So to get the word out and to promote it, felt that it's, I think individual counties within the 40,000 limit will probably try to promote it too, but since the Department of Commerce is the one that has the initial contacts with these businesses that are looking to come in, it'd be a natural place to bring that up as how they could have existing workforce available to them going to the rural remote worker and have a potential incentive to do that. And then Section 7, adding that in that says the provisions shall expire on July 1, 2025. That is, unless it is extended by the legislature at that time. So that's a kind of a brief run through of what I thought it would be maybe good to have it spelled out so we have the legislative intent in here on what this bill is hopefully going to do. Oh, second? Okay, so second was Representative Hoheisel. Representative Lynn, you have a question? Welcome back.
Thank you. I do, Mr. Chair. Page 2, line 4, it says 5 net new remote jobs. I'm going to guess that the intention is that these jobs are completely new and not newly remote. Is that the case?
The intention would be that they would be completely new.
Is that kind of spelled out somewhere? I want to make sure that we're not just taking jobs, you know, from Olathe and sending them remotely. I want to make sure that they're new positions completely and not newly remote.
Okay,
I'm just asking for clarification on that.
yeah, I mean, the idea is that this would be a company that would be expanding their current Kansas operation, or new companies in Kansas that would establish new remote jobs. That would be the intention that I believe that was explained in the bill during the hearing, and that it wasn't taking a Johnson County job existing and moving it remote, but it was putting new workers out into rural areas. And might ask for clarification from, I see Tricia Purden here, who had some of it. Is that correct, Tricia?
Yes, that's correct. It's intended to only service new or expanding businesses. So in order to be eligible for this, they would have had to add those new positions in order to take advantage of this.
Okay, thank you, Ms. I just want to make sure that that's clear in the bill.
Representative Shue? Or different question, or
It's a different question. So if Representative Wagasinger was along the same line,
Representative Wassinger?
I think you need to specify, it's completely vague, with just new remote jobs. Whether it's new positions or whatever it is, I think it's, when you just say new jobs, well, this is a new job, we made this job remote. And I think you have a valid question about it. So I think something could be used in there to make it clear that it has to be for new positions. And I'd ask the reviser for some help.
David, if you were going to add that clarification, where would you see that it would be a good place to have it?
Mr. Chairman, I think you could either add that to the definition of remote job on page 1, lines 29 through 33, and make it clear that would be a new position within the expanding or new business, and not a transfer or a shift, and then you can make an amendment either on page 2 and like line 4 with 5 net new remote jobs. I think it'd probably be best to just put it in the definition of remote job. That way it's it should cover everything where it talks about remote jobs. It would just be that newly created position.
So remote job means a newly created full-time permanent remote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, David, if you could read with that change the entirety of section F there. No, F. No, you put it in right here. Remote jobs means a newly created full-time.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yes. Now, so if you look at page 1, line 29, subsection F there, the definition of remote job would now read, means a newly created full-time permanent remote or mobile employee of an expanding or new business who works for.
That sound right, Representative Flynn? for
Yes,
you?
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Representative Shu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This might not matter, maybe redundancy is okay, but that would also make line 4 on page 2 with the net new remote jobs a little redundant, which is, again, probably okay, but you're essentially saying 5 net new, and then remote jobs has a definition which includes new in it, but it doesn't really matter, I don't think.
Would you, on line 4, are you thinking minimum of 5 newly created remote jobs, something like that?
Mr. Chairman, I think if we just say creates a minimum of 5 remote jobs, that covers then the definition we pick up,
Okay.
and that would be the
Okay.
newly created position. So I think you just
Okay.
say creates a minimum of 5 remote jobs in rural areas. Strike not net new.
Okay. Okay. That's,
Yeah, and then I have a separate line.
okay.
This is along the lines of, I support this amendment. This is along the lines of what I was working on as well and thinking about. The only thing that I might ask to be added into this, if you are amenable to adding it to your motion, Mr. Chair, is changing this from a Rural Remote Worker Incentive Act to a pilot program, and then changing all the references from act to pilot program, because especially with the sunset, especially with this being a new thing, it doesn't change the bolts of the bill, right? But to me, a pilot program implies a little bit more, experimentation or trying something new and exciting, and it's a new product. So I just was wanting to open that up for discussion as well.
Discussion on that? I actually like that idea, but I think that's a positive for a pilot, because the sunset does kind of make it a pilot. Any discussion, Representative Hoheisel?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't be opposed to that. That's actually a pretty good idea. It's impressive that Representative Shu just came up with that off the top of his head, but I would support doing that, yes.
Any other discussion? Representative Baker?
So I guess my fear would be it might restrict some people who are looking at doing that remote opportunity if it got near the end of the pilot. If you're having a 5 or 10 year sunset on it, and you get in the year or two before the pilot ends, would those people want to take that venture and risk having to restart that program? The program may not be renewed. I don't know, just thinking out loud. I understand the intent of the amendment, but I also understand as an employer that could be a restrictive part.
Yeah, the sunset could basically raise the same issue, but the thing on this program, I think that would make a difference. See what the rest of you think, is the fact that it's a one-time payment. So if you start it before the sunset or before the end of the pilot, and the money transferred back to the general fund, so does the liability to make that payment. Any other thoughts on that? Representative Wassinger?
I also have an amendment, and I'm not sure whether you want to vote on yours first and add that, or if you would prefer that I wait until after you take the initial vote.
Well, as far as Representative Shu's addition, what we might do is that that would make his would make just a minor change. We might go ahead and vote on this amendment, and then take Representative Shu's, and then take yours, Representative Wassinger, and then anyone else's, and see where we stand and what we might want to add or subtract. Any other questions, discussions about the amendment? Representative Osman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions. So the first one is, so it looks like as it's written right now, it's going to be, or as it's written into the the amendment, it would be a sunset after 3 years. Are we going to insert any language in terms of when we need to take affirmative action, when the legislature needs to take affirmative action to potentially renew this? If this is going to be a pilot program with the potential of expanding it, what is the timeline in which legislature needs to come back and discuss this?
It would have to, at a minimum, come back and discuss it. If it's going to end on June 30th of, or July 1, basically, but June 30th, then you'd have to discuss it at the latest in that session of the legislature in 2025. And not different than the Rural Opportunity Zone program, and a number of other ones do have a sunset on it. And like last year, we had a bill to extend the sunset on the ROS program that we did last year and extended it out. And so you'd have to act before really June 30th of 2025.
Okay.
And you could expand it before that too. If it was really going well, you could come back in 2024 or whatever and expand it.
Okay, thank you. I've got 2 more quick questions, if that's acceptable.
Sure.
Okay, so the first one is, I just want to make sure I understand exactly what a business is. There's a lot of tech sector jobs coming out of Seattle, Silicon Valley. As COVID hit, they realized we don't need all of our workers here in this location. They don't have a presence in Kansas, but they hire a lot of workers in Kansas. And so would this, if they are a completely fully new remote, this would not apply. You have to be a physical presence somewhere in Kansas.
The way this is written, yes.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to clarify that. One last thing. As I see the amendment, what you're adding in section 6 and section 7, that would take section 6, the old section 6, to section 8. And I think that just needs to be corrected.
Mr. Chairman, that's reflected in why we say renumber sections accordingly. That would just make that conforming amendment. So yes, you're correct, Representative. That will be section 8 of the bill.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Toplicker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was just going to ask for some more definite language on the pilot program and where that would go in the bill. And we've talked about it already a little bit on when we would come back and look. And I just wondered, do we need to get that, the language, the wording, do we need to get that figured out here before we, or if we're going to pass this bill out, do we need to do that right now?
We will, I think, come back after this amendment, and Representative Hsu will have one, but Representative Hsu, you might want to answer, go ahead and give an idea of what you were looking at.
Yeah, so I have a version drawn up that talks about it, but it's mixed in with other stuff. So I'm not sure if it's actually helpful for me to pass it out. But basically, all my amendment would do was in line 13 on page 1, it says, or actually, no, on line 11 on page 1, it says Rural Remote Worker Incentive Act. It would just change the word act to pilot program, and then all future references to act, you just change it to program. So functionally, it doesn't change the bill at all, but I think a pilot program has a more inventive and experimental implication than just kind of passing this new tool in the toolbox, which is great, it's important, but as we're talking to our constituents about it, I think pilot program is a little sexier, which is what I'm thinking about.
Representative Toplicker?
So do you think we do or don't need to put a relook at this by a certain date? Do we need that in here?
So if Representative Toplicker, if the chairman's amendment goes on, there's already a sunset on it after 3 years, and so a sunset of 3 years is basically a pilot program, anyways. So I think that's already built in if the chairman's amendment is adopted.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, to get if the legislature decides to continue it in the future, do we need to for smooth operation of this, as comment was brought up earlier, that it may change who wants to participate in this based on the sunset. For smooth transitioning to the new plan after it's maybe not going to be a pilot, and be more of a permanent, do we need to put that date in here that it shall be looked at by, I don't know, May or something, and determined by a certain date before, or do we want to wait for the sunset to happen, the program to go, in limbo, and then come back and look at it?
Well, my thought would be that while the legislature may change, there will be certain people that with an interest in the program that would still be here and on our committee, and there would be the plan at that time, if it was going well, and I don't know, we could consider, it's not in here, but we could consider having in like 2024 a report to the legislature, to the committee and the legislature on the progress of the program and what it's doing, to kind of tip off whether it needs to be pushed or whether it needs it has another year to see what it can do. But Representative Shue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's not a bad idea. So the amendment that I do have drawn up also has that part of it, that the Department of Commerce shall issue a report to the two chambers committees for a report in 2024. So I can include that as part of my amendment once we adopt yours.
Would that kind of deal with what you're thinking of, Representative Toplicker? Okay. Other discussion, questions? Don't see anything else. Any other questions? So with that, on the amendment, I would like to close on my amendment. And anything further before we want to make sure everything is clear? Okay. All those in favor of the amendment as presented and with the wording adding newly created in the position that we talked about, and the change in section 3 to take out net new, and then with the other items in here, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Amendment passes. We're back on the bill. Other amendments, and Representative Shue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David, I think it's appropriate to hand out. So basically on this amendment that David is handing out, ignore the sections that deal with, I believe I had a 5-year sunset in there, but everything else is germane to what Representative Toplicker and I have been talking about. So it just calls it a pilot program and changes all the references to a program rather than an act necessarily. And then also on page 2, on the new section 6, there is a report to the legislature. So ignore, that new balloon for section C, ignore the new section 7, but everything else is what I'm looking at.
Give you a little time to look through that. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question is for the reviser. Do we need, so we're officially striking I don't want the two amendments to conflict, so we're officially striking the sunset and all that language, correct?
Yeah, well, if I may, real quick, essentially treat my amendment as a conceptual amendment, and just what you're looking at is as kind of the bones of it. So just the pilot program part of this one, and then the report part of it in section 6 as a conceptual amendment. Everything else is already taken care of by the chairman's amendment.
Another question, Mr. Chair, if I may, for the maker of the amendment. When you settled on July 1, 2027, a 5-year sunset, how did you come to that?
It just came to me all of a sudden. I don't know. I take my ideas from lots of different places.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions for Representative Shu on his proposed amendment regarding the pilot and the report to the legislature? Okay, Representative Shu has made a motion on his amendment. Representative Hoheisel has seconded. And one last chance for discussion, questions. Representative Hoheisel, if you'd like to, Representative Shu, if you'd like to close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move my amendment.
Our amendment, as outlined, is to look at naming it a pilot program and establishing a report to the legislature in 2024. Does that catch everything, David? Okay. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Amendment passes, and we're back on the bill. Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to add a sentence to letter C under section 3 on the second page. At the end of, the secretary shall adopt rules and regulations necessary to implement and administer the provisions of this act. I'd like to add this sentence. All rules and regulations adopted pursuant to this section shall not expand the administrative powers or duties of the secretary beyond those powers or duties specifically granted under this act. Such rules and regulations shall not substantially alter the legislative intent regarding this act. This program, I guess, is now, would be the word instead of act.
Okay. Would you like to go ahead and kind of explain the thought process behind this? I mean, understand what you've read, but any other things before we go to questions?
Absolutely. Currently, we have seen, well, not currently, for the last 10 years, we've seen a rise in regulations come through from different departments and agencies going outside the legislative intent of any statute that we've passed. By putting that in, it gives them pause to remember that they need to follow what we originally wanted to do.
Okay, questions for Representative Wassinger? Representative Toplicker?
Mr. Chairman, this is more of a comment than a question, but I think that probably in every piece of legislation that we pass, we ought to put some provision in like this. Thank you.
To that I say amen.
Pardon?
To that I say amen.
Shu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the intent of this. I do intend to oppose this motion. I think we've had a lot of debate about this over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's pretty clear that there's already a system that works. It didn't work in one particular case with the Department of Labor, potentially, but that's only because the Attorney General made a decision and then changed that decision. And then so if that did not happen, I don't think any of these conversations would really be happening as much. So I think our system works, and I think this just kind of adds a little bit extra, but you know, I understand the intent.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Wassinger.
It has gone for many years. The fire marshal continues to try to expand his position within the department and take on more power than he's actually supposed to. I don't have those examples in front of me because that's something that both Representative Carmichael and Representative Highland can tell you. However, I can tell you that the Department of Agriculture tried to force every single county in the state to have a dedicated noxious weed director. That's great for big counties that have lots of money, but as a county commissioner, it was $60,000 on average for every single employee. Some of these rural counties share noxious weed directors, but that's not what the Department of Agriculture wanted them to do. Thankfully, they stepped back from that. It doesn't mean they won't do it again. 4 years ago, the Board of Cosmetology required that every salon had to have 2 sinks, one dedicated for work and one dedicated for hair. I thought, oh, well, okay, you should make everybody have 2 sinks. I totally missed it. It put out of business every single little home salon in Hayes, and I'm assuming of just about anywhere, because these were older ladies that were doing older ladies' hair, and they weren't going to put a second sink within their salon. So it effectively closed businesses in Kansas, and this is what overregulation does. The second time they came to us, I caught them, and they decided they'd go back and think about it. They want to have a licensed cosmetologist in every salon, aka room, in hospitals, nursing homes, and retirement homes. That would mean that you not only had to have 2 sinks in there, which most places don't, they usually have a sink to wash residents' hair, but it would also mean that they would not be able to have me go in, wash my mother's hair, dry it, and curl it in that room because I'm not a licensed cosmetologist. These are the things that happen all the time. What this does is also give them pause. We need to slow down the rate of regulations. It also needs to be reminded that we're the ones who pass the law, not the departments. So I respectfully disagree with you, Representative. I think it's very important that we do this and continue to do this so that we keep the lawmaking process to us and not to anybody else. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions, discussion? Okay. Don't see. Representative Shu, do you want to make this a motion on your amendment? No. Representative Wassinger. Okay. So would you like to close?
Mr. Chair, I close.
We have on the motion for amendment by Representative Wassinger on the rules and regulations adopted being put in line C on page 22. All those in favor on line 22, page 2. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. No. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Okay, we're back on the bill. Any other amendments for our bill today? Representative Toplicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not an amendment yet, but maybe just a question. On the $600,000, is that the total amount? It says this fund shall not exceed $600,000. That's the total amount?
That is the total amount. What it would do, it would have 150 jobs per year that could be done out of this fund. So yeah, it would be with the 3-year sunset, you would have a potential of basically 450 jobs.
And so is there any similar program like this in other states in the Midwest? And if there is, isn't this kind of a small amount to put into a program like this or even a pilot?
I don't, it's not a large amount, but it's amount to give it a chance to test it and see.
Okay, I guess it could be expanded along the way if there's a lot of demand. Could always become, we could always come back and change the amount and put more money
Yes.
in before the,
Yeah, that's the way that I could see it. If it took off and the 150 jobs were filled immediately, and all, you could come back the next year and ask to increase the fund. Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's $600,000 basically a year. So every year it would be appropriated to $600,000. So in a 3-year pilot, it would be 450 net jobs at $4,000 each. If the fund is only used, let's say, 50 jobs, so it took $200,000 and left $400,000 still in the fund, appropriations the next year would just have to kick an additional $200,000 into that to get to that $600,000 cap as well. But you're exactly right. We can come back in 2 years and Department of Commerce say, hey, this is a huge success. Let's raise the cap a little bit and fund it up to $1 million. And we can very easily do that as well. I think the $600,000 cap is appropriate with the pilot program just to see for a couple years how successful this is.
Other questions? Nope. Okay, no other questions? Okay. We're now back on the bill as amended. Representative Hoheisel, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I thank you for your work on this amendment. I wasn't sure how I felt about this, but with the proper protections in place, I feel comfortable giving it a shot. I'm not exactly sure how successful it's going to be, but we can give it a try because we need every tool in the toolbox we can get for our rural areas. So with that, I close.
Thank you, Representative Shu. We are now on David?
As amended.
As amended.
Representative Hoheisel, Mr. Chairman, as part of that motion, can you also maybe provide technical discretion to the reviser just to conform since we're adopting various amendments?
Give the reviser's office leeway in the amendments, technical amendments they need in my close.
Okay, so your motion on our bill as amended is to also give the reviser the license to do the technical amendments necessary to make everything flow that we've done today. So on the bill as amended, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion passes, and House Bill 2623 as amended will be passed out of committee. So thank you all very much for everything here in the first half of our session. We'll be back in March with some items that come to us from the Senate, plus I think we have 3 bills that, 2 that are already blessed and 1 that I've asked to be blessed that we can work on here in the second half. So until we come back in March 3rd, I believe it is, anything else, David, that we need to do to get you set? Or Melissa, anything else need to get you set? No? Okay, well, with that, we are adjourned.